Right. Looks like we're diving into Maurice Merleau-Ponty today. And wow, you've really gone deep here, huh? Articles, notes, all circling around his ideas, especially perception, embodiment, those big questions of how we exist in the world.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff from Merleau-Ponty. He's not just some obscure philosopher. He's really shaking things up, challenging assumptions and philosophy, psychology, even politics, and it all starts with how we experience the world.
That's what I'm picking up from all this emphasis on experience, not just abstract thought. You've got
Yeah.
the structure of behavior and phenomenology of perception right up front. Clearly, those are key for you.
Absolutely, those are central. Merleau-Ponty takes apart that traditional split, intellectualism versus empiricism. He's arguing both sides kind of miss the point, assuming there's this ready-made world just sitting there waiting to be known.
So instead of a world that's already packaged up, it's more like we're constantly creating it as we experience it. That's a pretty big shift. I'm guessing that's where embodiment comes in, the body, not just as some passive receiver, but actively shaping meaning.
Exactly right. And to really get this, it helps to remember Merleau-Ponty's own background. He's steeped in existentialism, phenomenology, sure, but also Gestalt psychology, psychoanalysis, even art, literature. Think Husserl, Heidegger, Sartre, but also Cézanne, all those influences feeding into his thought.
So not just your typical philosophy lineup. It's like he's pulling from all over, trying to get a more complete view of what it means to be human.
And that complete view, it starts with perception. Merleau-Ponty says perception isn't passive. It's not just information coming in. It's an active, embodied engagement with the world.
Okay, so instead of, say, a camera just capturing an image, it's more like a dancer interpreting music through movement. There's an agency there, the perceiver shaping what they perceive.
I like that analogy, very much so. This is where his critique of those traditional theories comes in, the ones that break down experience into tiny bits, sensations, judgments. For Merleau-Ponty, we experience wholes, gestalts, meaningful structures that can't be reduced.
Right, like we see a face, not just a bunch of eyes, nose, mouth.
Yeah.
It's the relationships, the whole gestalt that makes it a face. But how does he explain that ability to perceive wholes? Is it all in the mind?
That's where the body becomes crucial. He brings in this idea of the body schema, our preconscious understanding of our own body and how it can move. We don't think about this schema, we live it, and it shapes how we perceive and act in the world.
So it's not just that we have bodies, it's that our very way of being in the world is fundamentally embodied. That's profound. And I see you've got Schneider highlighted here in your notes. Is that a key example for Merleau-Ponty?
Absolutely. Schneider was a patient studied by Gelb and Goldstein. He had brain damage that really messed with his spatial understanding in very specific ways. For Merleau-Ponty, this proved how vital the body is, even for basic spatial awareness. We don't just think space, we live it through our bodies.
It makes you wonder how much of what we think is purely mental is actually rooted in the physical, like language, emotions, our sense of self even.
You're right on track with where Merleau-Ponty's going. He argues all these seemingly abstract things are deeply connected to our embodiment. Our bodies aren't just vehicles, they're the medium of experience itself, how we make sense of everything.
So we're not just in the world, we're of it, totally intertwined through our bodies. That's quite different from like the Cartesian view of mind, separate from body.
And the interconnectedness, that's what he calls being toward the world. Our bodies don't just allow us to perceive, they orient us towards the world, giving our experience meaning, direction.
And this being toward is always directed at something, right? It's got that intentionality, that purpose. We're not just passively existing, we're reaching out, engaging.
Precisely. Think about how you move through your own home, a familiar room. You don't calculate every step, your body just knows the space. That's that pre-reflective, embodied intelligence at work.
Like our bodies have their own wisdom, a way of knowing that goes beyond our conscious thoughts.
And it's not just movement. It shapes how we see others, communicate, create art even. But before we get into all that, I see you flagged Merleau-Ponty's view on the world itself. We've talked about how we experience it, but for him, what is it?
Right, because if perception is so tied to our bodies, does that mean the world is just our subjective creation? Is there any objective reality out there?
Merleau-Ponty avoids those extremes, pure subjectivism or naive realism. He talks about the phenomenal field, the world as it appears to us, and it's already full of meaning because of our embodied engagement. But it's not just our imagination.
So the world isn't a blank canvas. We're not just projecting onto it. There's something out there that's the raw material, so to speak.
Exactly, and he uses this phrase, the flesh of the world. to describe this like pre-objective realm we're always intertwined with. It's not separate from us, it's the ground of being, where both subject and object come from.
Okay, I see how this flesh concept is becoming central. It ties together perception, embodiment, the nature of reality itself.
It does, and it has huge implications for how we understand ourselves, our relationship with the world, even how we interact. But before we go there, you also noted his political thought. He wasn't just an armchair philosopher, was he?
Yeah, I'm really curious about that, how these ideas of perception, embodiment, this flesh, connect to his politics. We've got humanism and terror, the adventures of the dialectic here. Seems like a complex relationship with Marxism.
It is. Definitely deserves a closer look. He was engaged with the big questions of his time, wasn't afraid to challenge the dominant ideologies. His take on Marxism was especially nuanced, changed over his life.
What I've gathered is his early work leans towards Marxism, but later on he's much more critical, especially of that Soviet model.
Right, he was really troubled by the violence, the totalitarianism happening in the name of communist ideals. And his critique of Sartre's version of existential Marxism, that was pretty sharp.
Makes sense given his emphasis on embodiment, being situated. Hard to square a totally free subject with the constraints of history, material conditions.
Exactly. Merleau-Ponty saw our freedom as always embedded in context, shaped by our past, our social structures, even our bodies. That changes how we think about political action and social change.
Sounds like he's pushing for a more grounded, nuanced politics, one that acknowledges the complexities of human agency, its limitations too.
Good way to put it. But before we go too far down that political road, we got to come back to that flesh concept. It's the key to so much of his thought, especially as we move into his later work.
Agreed, it's dense, but I'm starting to see how it weaves everything together, perception, embodiment, even politics. Like
Yeah.
he's giving us a whole new vocabulary, a new way of seeing and being in the world.
And that's what makes him so relevant, even now. Merleau-Ponty challenges us to get past those simple either categories, to embrace the ambiguity of experience, to see the interconnectedness of everything.
It's a lot to chew on for sure. I'm eager to dig deeper into this flesh and where it leads us.
Me too. There's so much more to uncover, especially as we get into his later stuff, how his understanding of expression, art, even the nature of being itself evolves. But that's a conversation for our next installment. Okay, so last time we were talking about flesh, that central concept in Merleau-Ponty's later work. It's one that often gets misinterpreted, though. It's not about physical flesh, literally.
Yeah, I'm starting to get that. It's more like the underlying condition for both our bodies and the world around us, right?
So you got it. It's that primordial unity where the distinctions we make, self and other, subject, object, they all emerge from. It's hard to grasp because it challenges how we usually think.
Like he's asking us to rethink the very categories we use to understand reality. Instead of separate things just interacting, it's more a dynamic field where everything's connected.
Right. And this field, this flesh, it's not just static, it's alive, constantly in motion, this interplay between what's sensing and what's sensed. Actually, I see you've got a quote marked up here from The Visible and the Invisible. It says, "Vision is not a certain mode of thought or presence to self. It is the means given me for being absent from myself, for being present from the inside at the fission of being, only at the end of which do I close up into myself."
Whoa, that's dense, to say the least. Fission of being. Is he talking about some kind of cosmic explosion here?
Not in a literal sense, but it does point to this radical openness, a kind of breaking apart of our normal sense of self that happens when we perceive. Merleau-Ponty argues that when we really see something, we're not just treating it as an object, we're participating in its being somehow.
So it's not just me over here looking at a tree over there. It's more like my perception is tangled up with the tree itself, blurring the lines.
That's it, exactly. And this blurring, this entanglement, it happens through our bodies. He uses touch as an example. When I touch something, I'm not just feeling that object, I'm feeling my own hand touching too. There's this double sensation, this back and forth that highlights how self and world are intertwined.
Like it's a two-way street, not just one-way traffic. I'm acting on the world, but the world's acting on me. And through that exchange, meaning happens.
That's a good way to put it. And this reciprocal thing, this intertwining, Merleau-Ponty calls it the chiasm. It's not just touch, it's all our senses, our interactions with other people, even how we understand time and space.
So this chiasm is kind of the structure of that interconnectedness we keep coming back to.
Yeah.
How the flesh folds in on itself, creating distinctions, but without separating things completely.
Exactly right. And this is where his thinking gets really interesting, especially for someone coming from philosophy. He's not erasing distinctions. He's showing how they come out of a deeper unity. It's a way to hold together the one A, B, the many, the universal, and the particular.
That's a tough balancing act, philosophically speaking. Finding that middle ground between idealism and realism, monism and pluralism, I can see how that appealed to someone looking for alternatives to those classic positions.
And what makes it even more compelling is he's not just playing with concepts. He's rooting it all in lived experience, the concrete ways we perceive and interact.
Which brings us back to art. I know you're really interested in how Merleau-Ponty sees art as this way to reveal the flesh, that underlying connectedness.
Yeah, he argues that art, especially painting, can make visible what we usually don't see, that depth and complexity of how we engage with the world. He uses Cezanne, the painter, as a great example. Cezanne struggled to capture not just what he saw, but what it felt like to see.
So it's not about representing things accurately. It's about conveying the experience of perception, that intertwining of the seer and the scene we talked about.
Exactly. And for Merleau-Ponty, this struggle to express the flesh of the world, it's not just for artists. It's something we all do through language, gestures, even how we move through the world. We're all artists of our own lives, in a sense, shaping and reshaping the world through our actions.
That's a powerful thought. We're not just passive, we're active participants in creation. But it also brings up responsibility, right? If we're shaping the world through how we see and act, are there ethical implications there?
That's a big question, and Merleau-Ponty doesn't shy away from it. He saw the power of our embodiment, but also the potential for harm. But maybe that's a conversation for another time. For now, let's stick with this idea of expression and how it connects to his later work on language, meaning, all that.
You mentioned this connection between painting and language. How does that play out in his philosophy?
He sees them both as expressive forms, revealing the flesh, but in different ways. Painting does it through color, line, composition, while language works through sound, rhythm, the interplay of signifier and signifier.
So they're both trying to grasp something beyond the literal, something about the experience of being in the world.
Exactly. He even compares language to music, saying it's less about conveying finished thoughts and more like singing the world, giving voice to that richness and complexity of our embodied existence.
It makes you think about how much gets lost when we reduce language to just a tool, just for transmitting information. A whole dimension of meaning-making gets missed.
And that's what's so refreshing about Merleau-Ponty. He reminds us language isn't just a system, it's a way of being in the world, of making sense of things, connecting with others.
Which brings us back to intersubjectivity, something you've marked here. How does he approach this whole problem of other minds?
He throws out those traditional explanations, analogy or inference. Instead, he says our shared embodiment, our common way of being in the world, that's what lets us directly perceive others as living, feeling subjects.
So it's not about logic deductions. It's more immediate, intuitive. Like we recognize ourselves in the other and the other in us.
Exactly. And this recognition, it happens through our bodies, gestures, expressions, even how we move around each other. There's this silent dialogue, a pre-reflective understanding that's deeper than words concepts.
But this understanding, like you said before, it's not total transparency, right? There's always mystery, that otherness in our encounters.
For sure, we can never fully grasp another person's subjectivity, what they're living through, but that doesn't mean we're each trapped in our own little world, that flesh of the world, that shared ground. That's what makes genuine connection possible, that shared sense of meaning, purpose. But to dig deeper into that inner subjectivity, especially how it plays out politically, we'll have to save that. It's a great bridge to what you've got next, which looks like Merleau-Ponty's complicated relationship with Marxism.
All right, so we've been really digging into this flesh idea, the interconnectedness that runs through so much of Merleau-Ponty's work. I see how it links perception, embodiment, even art. But you're saying it gets political, too. That's an angle I wasn't quite expecting.
Well, you got to remember, Merleau-Ponty's writing in a specific context, right? Post-war France, existentialism is all the rage, Marxism is this huge force. He can't not engage with it.
Especially given how much he emphasizes us being situated, embodied beings, this idea of pure, abstract freedom. It seems kind of at odds with that.
Exactly. So you look at Humanism and Terror. That's him early on, wrestling with Marxism. There's a draw there, the proletariat struggle. It resonates with his own ideas about collective action shaping the world.
But then, well, history happens, right? Yeah. Stalinism, the Gulag,
yeah,
all that idealistic stuff loses its shine pretty quick.
And you see that shift in Adventures of the Dialectic. He's really critical now, both of that Soviet model and Sartre's take on revolution. The violence, the way individual experience gets crushed, it just goes against everything he's developing.
Because for Merleau-Ponty, it's not about forcing some grand plan onto reality, right? It's about working within the world as it is, recognizing that messy, embodied nature of things.
You got it. And that's where institution comes in. He sees institutions not as these fixed things, but more like living organisms, constantly evolving through the actions of individuals. Even philosophy itself, it's an institution in that sense.
So instead of trying to tear everything down, it's more a gradual, organic process, working within the system to change it from the inside.
Right, and that's where his critique of Sartre gets really sharp. For Sartre, freedom is all about negation, totally transcending any situation you're in. But Merleau-Ponty saying, hey, that ignores history, the ways our past, our bodies even, limit what we can actually do.
We're free, but it's a situated freedom, shaped by the world we're already part of. It's more nuanced, maybe more realistic about what human agency can achieve.
And for politics, the implications are huge. It means real change happens through dialogue, through working together, recognizing that interconnectedness, not some violent revolution.
It's interesting how this flesh concept, which started with perception, ends up having this ethical, political dimension. Like if we're all part of this same fabric, we can't just act in isolation.
Exactly. Merleau-Ponty's pushing us to see how our embodiment matters, not just for understanding the world, but how we act within it.
It's like he's saying, sure, go ahead, think about perception, about art, all that good stuff. But don't forget, those thoughts, they have consequences for how we live together, how we build a world that's meaningful.
And that's what makes him so relevant, even today. We're so obsessed with technology, with individualism, it's easy to lose sight of that embodied, interconnected reality he's pointing to.
This deep dive, it's given me a whole new appreciation for his work, that's for sure. It's not just philosophy for philosophy's sake, it's a call to action, a way of being that's both thoughtful and de-engaged.
And that's the best takeaway, I think. Merleau-Ponty's not handing us the answers, but he's giving us the tools, the concepts to grapple with what it means to be human and all its messy, embodied complexity.
So to everyone out there exploring Merleau-Ponty, remember, it's not just about understanding his ideas, it's about embodying them. Let them shape how you see the world, how you act, even your politics. Who knows what kind of world we could create if we really took his insights to heart.